Martin Toppy is the son of a famous traveller and the father of my unborn child. He's 17, I'm 33. I was his teacher. I'd have killed myself by now if I was brave enough. I don't think it would hurt the baby. His little heart would stop with mine. He wouldn't feel himself leaving one world of darkness for another, his spirit untangling itself from me.
That was Donal Ryan reading from All We Shall Know, which has just been translated into French by Albin Michel. Donal, thanks for coming. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you so much.
Well, those opening lines give us the bare bones of the story. It does go a lot further and deeper than that, but what we can hear is that it's about a woman who's carrying a baby, and Melody She, that protagonist, is not always a very sympathetic figure. Was it a stretch taking on that voice as a first-person character?
Oh, actually, funnily enough, it was quite an easy novel to write compared to other things I've written. And Melody's voice was quite loud and clear in my head. I'm not sure exactly why, but I seemed to know her fairly intimately. And the novel, it flowed pretty easily, actually.
So being a woman in the first person wasn't too difficult?
Well, I'd never considered it to be different very much, because I guess we don't ever know anything for certain. I mean, there are no absolute facts in life, and so I could just guess at what it would be like to be in this kind of situation. And I guess, certain aspects of Melody's character and situation were informed by my own experience, things I've witnessed or read or been part of, and these things always feed into what you write. But overall, Melody was almost the easiest character I ever wrote.
Now, as a woman carrying a child, the question of abortion comes up very briefly in the book, and this was published in 2016, which was before the Eighth Amendment to the Constitution was repealed in Ireland, which technically legalises abortion, although the debate around that issue definitely predates the vote. How did that debate influence the book you were writing?
It didn't at all, actually, because I always try to avoid being tendentious in fiction or trying to make any political point, and so it was just the fact that Melody obviously had the option to go to England for an abortion, considered it and didn't. And that's just a part of the book. There was no real political motivation behind that at all.
Part of the social landscape. Now, All We Shall Know does feature characters from what we'd call the traveller community. Melody is very close to them. And these are people who aren't always so visible in literature and the arts, often the victims of discrimination, both in Ireland and in Europe. In France, we see that too. Now, 2 years ago, travellers' ethnic status was recognised officially by Taoiseach Enda Kelly, the head of the government at the time. What do you think this will do?
It's funny, I remember years ago when I wrote a very, very early draft of this book, and I asked a friend of mine if they thought I'd gotten the traveller voice right, and he said, I wouldn't know, Donal, I've never spoken to a traveller. And I couldn't believe it, because for me, where I'm from, travellers were my neighbours, my schoolmates, my friends at times, and the traveller voice to me was as easy to write as Melody's voice. They rang clear and true in my ear. But I can see, obviously now, because sometimes I walk around in kind of a daze of idiocy, and I'm shocked into awareness of things, which is a good way to be for a writer, I think. But I think it's given travellers a new voice in society, and people can see more clearly now exactly what it's like to be a traveller, and to be so separate and still so much part of society, because Ireland is a small country and travellers are they're part of pretty much every community, but still, are still seen by many people as being other, as being separate from us. It's a very strange situation, really. Yeah,
why did it take such a long time coming? It seems very late, the 21st century, for this to be officially recognised.
Yeah, we seem to be having kind of a series of very drastic and sudden changes in Ireland. It's like we've suddenly woken up in the last 10 years or so to ourselves, and we started to realise, what it takes to be a proper republic, luckily.
Indeed, you're originally from County Tipperary and you live today not too far from there in Limerick, and rural Ireland is very present in your work. You're not the only artist to have found inspiration there. Here in Paris, the Irish Cultural Centre is showing the work of French artist Tommy Ungara, who lived in Ireland for more than 40 years before his death this year. His surrealist, witty collage and sculpture offer a satirical take on politics, religion and the absurdity of modern life. The director of the centre tells us more.
Ungerer and his wife Yvonne moved to Ireland in the mid-70s, and they settled there. They bought a house on a magnificent property with a 12th century castle, a spectacular lake, and a wonderful view, which you can actually see behind me in the collage. He raised his family in Ireland and he made work there, so obviously he was very inspired by the landscape. You can see cows in his work, but also they're just universal themes that appear in his work. But all the work was made in his studio in West Cork.
So Ireland's certainly a fertile terrain for visiting artists and local ones too. I mean, despite its small population, the country's made a disproportionately large contribution to the arts, especially literature. President Michael Higgins is a poet himself. It did take you a long time to embrace writing full-time, though, and despite all your success and awards, you still have a day job, I believe, teaching.
Yeah, I teach creative writing at the University of Limerick, a job that I absolutely love. And I think I've been very lucky that I've always had jobs that I love, and I've been able to work writing around them. But being a teacher of creative writing, I suppose, it's the best job that a writer can have if you have to have a job. Because I'm engaged with language and with story all the time and with other writers. And so I can consider the craft kind of closely on a daily basis. So it's a great place to be.
And despite people being very familiar with arts from Ireland, literature and such, its closest neighbours, the British, have shown themselves up to be a little bit ignorant recently about perhaps more serious issues like Irish history. The former UK Education Minister, Andrew Adonis, said that very little Irish history and culture is taught in English schools, and I think there should be a debate about changing this. I'm surprised how little young people know about Ireland, even those of Irish heritage. Now, how have you seen the whole Brexit debate in as much as it concerns the Irish border?
Yeah, it's starting to be slightly wearing now, and it looks as though it's going to just kind of go on forever, really. But it's a real worry because it's a very recent memory, the troubles in the north of Ireland, and any chance of anything pushing towards a return to anything like that is a huge danger for all of us. And I guess, I mean, I don't blame kids and people in Britain for not knowing Irish history, because if you don't study history in school, you won't know. And that's the thing. I mean, teaching history in schools is so important. And I guess history can be taught, again, in a tendentious way. People will be pushed towards certain conclusions about certain things because of the way history is taught. But it's a huge worry, all right.
Yeah. Now, your most recent book in English, From a Low and Quiet Sea, brings something we see more commonly in the headlines to the world of the novel in the form of Syrian refugee Farouk. That does feel like a bit of a departure from your previous work. What prompted you to tell his story?
Well, I had written previously, I wrote a story called Long Puck, set in Homs a few years ago, and I'd written some stories about African immigrants to Ireland. But Farouk's story just struck me. I mean, it was based in its fundaments on a story I read in the Guardian newspaper about a doctor from Syria who paid all of the money he had to what he thought were a kind of high-end type of trafficker, which is an awful thing to even consider, to get his family across the Mediterranean. And disaster struck, of course. And I saw the story reported, in a sympathetic but almost perfunctory way. I thought to myself, how much did it felt to be that person in that moment? And so I had to appropriate a lot of a person's actual life experience, which brings with it a certain amount of guilt, but I did feel absolutely compelled to do it, to try to imagine what it would feel like to be this man in this situation. It's kind of, because for me, that's kind of what fiction is. It's just the act of extending your empathy as far as you can to try to be somebody else for a while.
Indeed, and finding inspiration in the society we live in. Now, finally, we ask all of our guests to give us a cultural tip. And you've chosen music from singer-songwriter Steo Wall. Can you tell us why we should be listening to him? Yeah,
I first met Steo Wall, actually. He was launching a book called Songs of Social Protest at UL, and he sang live, and it was just the most amazing experience. He sang a song about his grandmother, Sarah Doran, and it was just so raw and beautiful. And he's got just this absolute honesty as an artist. I think he's amazing.
Donal Ryan, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Well, we'll wrap up the show to the sound of Steo Wall's track What's Wrong with the World, Ma, from the album Where I'm From. Do remember to check out our website, and you can also keep up with us on social media too. There's more news coming up on France 24 just after this.
They're killing the water for our sons and our daughters. We're like sheep being led to a slaughter. Pout out your lips, you look good, hon. Take another selfie, have fun. What's wrong with the world, man? What's wrong with the world? What's wrong with the world, man? What's wrong with the world? What's wrong with the world, man? What's wrong with the world? What's wrong with the world, man? What's wrong with the world?